Welcome back to episode 3 of Rings of Power. Season 2 has so far not exactly been an improvement over season 1, but we have had the occasional scene that functioned without any inconvenient holes emerging. Will we find out why they released the first 3 episodes on the same day? Is there a little mini arc to hook the viewers with something genuinely dramatic and spectacular? Or has the incompetency train barreled through the station and ploughed into an orphanage? Episode 3 opens by showing us the scene from episode 7 of season 1, where Elendil tells Berek, Isildur's horse, to stop being naughty before releasing him into the wilderness. The wilderness that recently suffered a catastrophic but also not catastrophic volcanic eruption, and is now populated by orcs who came from somewhere. You may recall, you don't fucking recall, because the dialogue in this show is profoundly forgettable, but shortly before the eruption, Elendil told Isildur that
when a horse of Westernness rides into battle, he forms an unbreakable bond with the soldier he bears. In time they become as one, even knowing the innermost feelings of each other's heart.
You know his feeling?
No, he knows yours.
And so this is the explanation for Berek being able to find Isildur. Given that Elendil knows that horses have some magical telepathic bond with their riders, I am unsure why he didn't ride or follow the horse to try and find his son, unless the reason is that he truly believed his son to be dead and that there was no point, in which case he has just released his son's horse into enemy territory to die of starvation or worse. Speaking of worse, rather predictably, the horse finds itself surrounded by orcs.
Don't be afraid, Four Legs. We ain't gonna eat ya yet.
This is something that you say maybe to a man whom you intend to enslave or torture. This is not something that anyone would ever say to a horse, because horses cannot understand English, which then leads me to believe that the orc said this for no reason other than to inform the audience that the orcs are evil and sadistic. Keep that in mind, we will get back to that later. The horse then runs off and we get a Looney Tunes sequence where the orc refuses to let go because I guess he doesn't want his carefully prepared soliloquy about skinning the horse alive to go to waste before it escapes into the Black Forest. We know it is the Black Forest because one of the orcs tells the other,
Out there's the Black Forest.
And because Mordor isn't dangerous enough already, and because we need that teeny tiny bit more tension, we are also told that no one comes out of the Black Forest alive. Rings of Power is of course full of cliffhangers, but probably the strangest one is baiting Isildur's death, because he is one of about 8 characters whom 95% of the audience will know cannot die during the series. So he's alive, because of course he is. We will never learn how he escaped a burning building falling on his head, because hey look guys, there's spiders and he's fighting an orc and now he's escaped.
Yay!
Now let's do that thing where we rewind and think about what the writers are actually telling us, and try to draw out what happened off-screen. Isildur got flattened by the burning shack, but somehow managed to luck his way into not dying from being squashed or from smoke inhalation. Miriel was blinded by ash from this building going in her face, and yet Isildur is totally fine after the whole building falls on top of him. He obviously would have crawled out from under the burning building as fast as humanly possible, and by the time he was out, all of the Númenóreans had disappeared. Can we account for this?
Nope.
Because this would require that he didn't call for help, and the only reason why he would not call for help would be if he were unconscious, which means he would be dead from smoke inhalation. Alternatively, he did call for help, but no one heard him, because they had all sprinted over the horizon so as to not be present when Isildur emerged. But wait, we're not done yet. Isildur then wandered around for a bit and got captured by spiders, was conveniently tied up right next to an orc whose dagger he uses to free himself, no joke, in about 2 seconds, and then his horse shows up to carry him out of the spooky forest. In summary, Isildur is alive because the writers are manipulating the world of Middle-earth so as to ensure that he remains alive, and they are not even making the effort to hide the fact that this is what they are doing. So the horse being able to find Isildur obviously happened because it happened in the Two Towers, provided we are talking about the extended edition, and yes, I do have a video on that topic. Berek is the horse belonging to a spoiled rich kid who gets whatever he wants, and we can potentially infer from this that Berek is far more intelligent than Isildur. Additionally, they appear to have some kind of psychic bond, which explains why Berek was able to find him, and the reason they have this bond is because they just kinda do. Isildur rode him into battle, and they are now bonded. In the extended edition of the Two Towers, Brago and Aragorn form a similar connection in the stables, as Aragorn calms Brago through his use of both elven magic and through his experience with horses. Éowyn then sets Brago free, and Brago returns later to rescue Aragorn. What we get in Rings of Power is that Elendil says, "Oi, stop it," then he gets released, then he runs into enemy territory to find Isildur because it was mentioned that one time that Númenórean horses are like heat-seeking missiles. This is better than nothing. This was indeed set up, and so it does not come out of nowhere, but it still very much translates as a deeply inferior and far more simplistic copy and paste of Brago rescuing Aragorn. Anyway, as soon as Berek arrives, all the spiders start hatching. They of course knew that Isildur needs to go on to defeat Sauron, and so they waited to attack him until Isildur had a means of escaping the cave. Isildur gets in a fight with an orc as Shelob approaches. Yes, this is apparently Shelob. Unfortunately, the writers even got this wrong. Everyone knows that Shelob is a hot gothic juggernaut, and for some reason they decided to turn her into a giant spider, distinctly lacking in the chesticles department. Okay, Isildur. Really fucking lucky. Brago, no, it's not Brago, it's Berek. Has no chill, knows where Isildur is at all times. Cut to the funeral of King Tar Palantir. Elendil tells his daughter that the king always protected the faithful, indicating that Elendil values this so much that this is what he chooses to tell his daughter as they attend the king's funeral. So what exactly does Elendil mean by the faithful? Here we need to enter something of a rabbit hole, because as I was entirely unfamiliar with the source material when I made my videos covering Season 1, outside of my love for the Peter Jackson films, I was unaware that the faithful is a proper noun as opposed to an adjective. It refers to a specific group of people known as the faithful, rather than merely describing a group of people who exhibit faith in something. So how could I possibly have misunderstood this? In my defense, the faithful are mentioned precisely twice in Season 1. In Episode 3, when interrogating Elendil, Miriel says, "The faithful believe that when the petals of the white tree fall, it is no idle thing, but the very tears of the Valar themselves." And in Episode 8, Miriel says, "The way of the faithful is committing to pay the price, even if the cost cannot be known." Without knowledge of the source material, this appears to be a reference to certain citizens of Númenor having faith in the Valar who gave them their island. As for why only some of the Númenóreans believe in the Valar, given that this transaction between a god being and mortals only happened a few centuries prior, is unknown. What we do know from Season 1, however, is the following. The Númenóreans were given their island by the Valar for helping the elves. The faithful believe that the petals of the white tree are the tears of the Valar. King Tar Palantir was loyal to the elves, which does not necessarily mean that he was one of the faithful. And Pharazôn does not like elves, which again does not necessarily mean that he is not one of the faithful. The idea that Elendil and Miriel are members of the faithful, which is an established political faction who are loyal to the elves and the Valar, and that there is a separate faction who are looking to take control of Númenor away from the faithful, is not an idea that is present in Rings of Power, which is a catastrophic failure on the part of the writers as they have neglected to establish this whatsoever. Again, if you know the books, this will inherently make far more sense, but it is the job of the adaptation to adapt the books into another format, and so "it's in the books, stop complaining" is not a defense. Anyway, Eärien tells her father not to blame himself for Isildur's death, because true blame belongs to another. Even if we disregard the repeated and convenient plot device known as magical bullshit, it does make sense for her to say this. So I am not criticizing the writing for Eärien, but I am going to take this opportunity to remind you why Isildur is seemingly dead, and what culpability Elendil has in the apparent loss of his son. Isildur wanted to join the Sea Guard, only to drop out after months of training because he wanted to go west. He then told Elendil that he wanted to do something worthy of Númenor, which did not include being a member of the Sea Guard. He then managed to manipulate his father by covering up the identity of a serial arsonist, thereby allowing him to join the army and travel to the Southlands. Meanwhile, Elendil rescued Galadriel and Sauron because the sea is always right. He then led the Númenorian army to the Southlands because the sea is always right, and after the catastrophic volcanic eruption that apparently claimed the life of his son, Elendil realized that the sea might not always be right. To summarize, Elendil is a fucking idiot who was too dense to realize what his son was doing. He didn't do any follow-up to find out what actually happened to the destroyed ships in the harbor, and he led his giddy train wreck of a son to a foreign land to engage in a war against a few hundred orcs, acting upon Galadriel's false belief that Sauron was the king of the Southlands, with the intention of instilling him as the king and uniting the people. Elendil is more to blame for Isildur's apparent death than anyone else. However, if you recall, Eregion looked into the Palantir at the end of Season 1. Why did she do this? Well, the writers give us a quick flashback to help explain it.
So know this, our island will fall, and there is still time.
So it is unclear if this is a retcon, because this is a discussion that did not take place in Season 1. The king never spoke these words to Eregion, which means either that this has now been added retroactively, or she saw this in the Palantir. Either way, the writers continue their trend in Season 2 of inserting visions directly into their characters' heads in order to drive the plot, and we will find out by the end of this very episode who exactly Eregion blames for Isildur's death and why. Miriel and Pharazôn then show up for the funeral, accompanied by a handful of guards. Miriel is still blind, and she relies on Elendil to translate what is happening. This is good, because this indicates that she trusts him to be her eyes more than she trusts anyone else, such as Pharazôn, thereby suggesting that she has reason to believe that Pharazôn is up to something. They discuss the presence of various nobles from the north, and then this nice lady walks straight up to Miriel and backhands her into next week.
I was not expecting that.
Because you can't spell funeral without fun. This woman is able to walk right up to the Queen of Numenor, who, need I remind you, is fucking blind, and assault her at her own father's funeral. I would say that Elendil is useless because he doesn't stop her, and, I mean, he is, but the guards should not have allowed this woman anywhere near the Queen, because had she been carrying a knife, Miriel would have just been murdered. But, as Season 1 established, both Miriel and Pharazôn are useless, and do not understand the value of having your guards guard things that are valuable. Which means this level of incompetence is at least consistent. Which, come to think of it, would this have potentially been a smart move for Pharazôn to remove his rival through force, rather than through plots and schemes? Possibly, although I am unsure yet if Pharazôn would actually be willing to have Miriel killed. This woman was pissed off that her son died in the Southlands, and instead of cleaving her in twain, Miriel gives her a cuddle, showing that she is deeply sorry and that she understands the frustrations and sorrow of the people. So let's quickly recall what Miriel did, what she should think about her actions in the Southlands, and what events allowed this to happen. Galadriel was restricted to the palace grounds. She escaped because the Númenórean guards are less useful than having taste buds inside your rectum, and during her subsequent adventure she convinced herself that Halbrand was the king of the Southlands. She tried to convince Miriel to assemble an army and take back the Southlands from the orcs, but she tempested all over the place and was arrested. She accidentally all of the guards into a nearby cell because the criteria for becoming an elite Númenórean guard is that you have 2 arms, 2 legs, and vulnerability to short, angry women. She escaped for a second time, broke into the king's bedchambers because, again, the Númenóreans do not use fucking guards, provided key information to Miriel but failed to convince her for the second time, only for her to be convinced later by a sign from the gods, at which point Miriel trained 500 volunteers to be soldiers, and we are supposed to believe that at least 300 of them died, given that only 1 boat returns. In summary, Miriel allowed herself to be convinced by Galadriel and a sign from the gods, which is not entirely Miriel's own fault, and her actions are more a consequence of Galadriel's misguided certainty regarding Halbrand's lineage, and her multiple interactions with Galadriel were only possible because the Númenóreans are seemingly collectively untrained, unskilled, naive, unsophisticated, and inexperienced. Actually, if we think about this a little deeper, Miriel was convinced by Galadriel that the orcs were taking over the Southlands and were an imminent threat to the rest of Middle-earth, presumably including Numenor. She assembled an army and sailed across the ocean to wipe them out and sit Halbrand on the throne. Having arrived, the Númenóreans have killed, 50 orcs? Maybe 100? Shouldn't she be furious that Galadriel was wrong? I know their timely arrival did indeed save the remaining Southlanders, all 20 of them, but Miriel did not travel across the world to save 20 people. She came to wipe out the orcs. She then returns to Numenor after a pretty catastrophic loss, not only seemingly unaware that Galadriel was ever so slightly mistaken in her claims about the Southlands, but also apparently intending to return with even more volunteers to feed into the meat grinder. She should feel somewhat responsible for what happened because she was misled, but because she inexplicably does not understand that Galadriel was wrong, her guilt only extends to, I got a lot of people killed by the forces of evil, but don't worry, we will go back and avenge them. Okay, Miriel doesn't understand what Galadriel did wrong, is sad that her People died. Really trusts Elendil. And Elendil is one of the faithful. Next up, we are treated to some more trademark clunky dialogue, characters being blind and or stupid, and a special delivery of symbolism with an extra topping of special. Miriel is going through her father's possessions, and as she finds a bracelet, Pharazon enters, surprising her, and he notices that she is trying to hide something behind her back. He asks what she is hiding, but Miriel puts the bracelet on, and this appears to fool Pharazon into thinking that the bracelet belonged to her. Because remember, Pharazon failed to even suspect that his son was behind the partial destruction of the Númenórean fleet, and so he is incredibly easy to fool. The bracelet is revealed in a later scene to be a key, allowing Miriel to access the Palantir. Anyway, now it is symbolism time. Pharazon tells Miriel that she is going to be coronated, and he offers
crimson for Númenor's future, or white her past.
Oh, okay, if you say so. We don't know why red and white symbolize these things. It is just established as something that is. Red could just as easily mean war, and white could mean purity. Actually, yeah, I'm doing this. A switch has been flipped, and Rings of Power is making me talk about the symbolic meaning of colors. Red is usually associated with courage, danger, and sexuality. As red is also the color of blood, it commonly symbolizes war, death, anger, and hatred. White is usually associated with innocence, purity, and new beginnings. As white is prominently seen in weddings, Jesus is commonly depicted as wearing white after the resurrection, and white also represents a clean slate. But Rings of Power has just informed us that red means future and white means past. Now, I understand that Rings of Power takes place in a hellish, time-bending pocket dimension where everyone is eternally enslaved by the writers, and that therefore these colors could have different cultural meanings in Númenor. But, given that the writers decided to have Pharazon explain what the colors mean, and given that, if anything, they are assigned the opposite meaning to what they would typically be associated with, this suggests that the thought process in choosing these colors started and ended with, I like red and white. One other possibility, dare I say probability, is that Pharazon is clearly trying to mislead Miriel, and his actions will quite probably lead to death, war, bloodshed, and a whole load of other things that can be symbolized by the color red. This may have been quite effective, as, if you recall, Miriel is blind, and therefore she only knows what the colors are because Pharazon has told her. But this relies on the audience knowing and understanding the meaning of the color red, whilst simultaneously relying on Pharazon and Miriel not understanding the meaning of the color red. Which means if the writers are trying to hint to the audience that, uh-oh, this Pharazon guy is no good, he wants her to wear red, then they are relying entirely on the characters being less intelligent than the audience. Because we are balls deep in symbolism land, Miriel decides to wear white because her father wore white, and we can infer that this is because he liked the past and he was loyal to the elves. But Pharazon, that dastardly trickster, he wants her to wear red.
I'm partial to the red. It will show the people you are a new kind of ruler for a new day.
Because he doesn't like the past and he's not loyal to the elves. The point of all this is to give us some conflict between Miriel and Pharazon, to set up what will happen in the final scene of the episode, and to show that they are political opponents with different objectives for Númenor, something that was simply not present in Season 1. And the writers have distilled these differences into looking forwards and looking backwards. Miriel likes the past. Pharazon likes the future. Rings of Power then tries to do political intrigue, and as we might expect, it is not intriguing in the slightest. Kemen, Eregion, Pharazon, and a brand new character, Lord Belzegar, are discussing Miriel's leadership. Kemen says that Miriel is the same as her father, she will never change, and she is not fit to rule in her current state. Just to recap briefly and remind you who Kemen and Eregion actually are and what they believe. Eregion was very anti-war, and therefore anti-Miriel. Kemen thinks only with his pickle, and therefore he is very anti-war, and therefore anti-Miriel. He attempted to convince his father Pharazon to stop the war, so saith the pickle, and after he was unsuccessful, he attempted to destroy Númenor's fleet himself to prevent them from being able to leave in the first place. Because Isildur is a selfish motherfucker, and because Elendil is retarded, Kemen got away with this without anyone suspecting a thing, despite Pharazon being fully aware that Kemen didn't want the Númenóreans to go to war, and despite the fact that Kemen was present at the scene of the crime, which means Pharazon is more blind than his political opponent. Anyway, Lord Belzegar agrees with Kemen and informs Pharazon that he was nearly chosen to rule instead of Miriel, which Pharazôn will have already known. But I didn't know this, so thank you, Lord Belzegar, for acknowledging that you are merely a figment of fiction, a puppet whose only purpose is to deliver exposition to beings beyond your comprehension. Then we get one of the funniest lines in the show. Lord Belzegar says that much of Numenor believes that Pharazôn should rule, partly due to Miriel's actions in the Southlands, but Miriel still has more support. And Eregion replies,
"What if someone knew a way to turn many into enough?"
She has the power to multiply the power of many into the power of enough, indicating that she has some super secret knowledge, a silver bullet that can bring down Miriel and cease her warmongery ways. We don't learn exactly what she is talking about in this scene, because of course we don't, but essentially what happens is Eregion explains that she found the Palantir at the end of Season 1. The reason this happened is because the king was conveniently crazy in just the right way so as to allow the plot to happen. Eregion not only looked into the Palantir, but also took it and managed to sneak past the king, who moments earlier seemed lucid enough to explain to Eregion, "Hey, go up into my attic, I have a surprise for you." Also, moments before the king opened the secret hatch and told Eregion to go and look at his magic balls, Eregion shouted for help from the guards because she thought the king was having a seizure.
Help! It's the king!
Which means Eregion managed to go into the secret chamber, use the Palantir, decide what to do, take the Palantir, go back into the bedchamber and close the super secret door before the guards showed up. Which, I don't know what else I expected. The Númenórean guards truly are comprehensively useless. Anyway, it is implied that she reveals all of this to Pharazôn, although we don't actually hear her say these words. This appears to present Eregion with a conflict of ideals, because she was told by King Tar Palantir in Season 1,
If the old ways of our people are not soon restored, our island will fall.
Before he told her to go and check out the Palantir. Which means that at this point, we don't actually know what Eregion is doing or why, which serves as yet another mystery box, as she appears to be trying both to restore the old ways and also to help Pharazôn take over. More will become clear by the end of the episode. In amongst all of this, Afrock, who has been dropping eaves, approaches the table and asks why these guild folk are dining in the old quarter with the lower class.
Came here to bury a king.
Should have liked to have been there.
Pity members of the common soldiery weren't invited.
Especially given the lower class of folk that were.
Did you just insult my father?
No, I believe I insulted you.
But Kemen, the scrawny, gangly, effeminate, spineless liar, backs off before Afrock, the highly competent Chad soldier, can turn him inside out. Okay, Eregion, helping Pharazôn for some reason. Lord Belzegar. He's also helping Pharazôn for some reason. Kemen. I guess Kemen's also helping Pharazôn for some reason. I know he's his dad, but they weren't exactly seeing eye to eye in Season 1, but I guess now they are. Cut to Mordor. This orc, whom we have seen a couple of times, tells Adar that the preparations are nearly complete, but they are safe in Mordor.
We are safe here. We have a home. Must we go to war again?
This orc's name, according to the subtitles, is Glug, which both sounds like it could be the name of an orc, but it also sounds just fucking pitiful. Glug continues that he does not wish to hunt Sauron, and he simply wants to forget the whole thing. Adar says that as he is the father of the orcs, it is his burden to be aware of such dangers and to do what is necessary to protect his children. They will never truly be safe until they have made certain that Sauron is no more. And then we get this.
What is happening?
As has happened a few times in Rings of Power, they have made interesting creative decisions that have quite rightly pissed off a whole load of fans of Tolkien's work. How dare you change the orcs? This is disrespectful. Stop pushing your agenda, etc., etc. We can argue back and forth about whether this is what Tolkien envisioned and why the writers decided to do this, neither of which I particularly care about, so let's make this simple. What does this scene actually tell us about Rings of Power's version of the orcs? And how does this fit with everything else that we have seen so far? The very clear purpose of this dialogue, as well as the fucking hilarious shot of Glug with his wife and kid, is to make the audience feel sorry for Glug. He didn't choose the Glug life chose him. Glug doesn't want to go to war. Glug not that kind of orc. This portrayal carries with it a whole load of implications. That the orcs are just like us and they want to settle down with the wife, maybe get a puppy and a 9-to-5 to put the kids through school. There are two problems with this, and the first is one of adaptation. This will hopefully surprise no one, but I'm not going to talk about how these orcs are different to how they are depicted either in Tolkien's books or in the Peter Jackson movies, because I don't care how they are different. I completely understand the argument that this is a bastardization of Tolkien's work, and that the writers have taken an idea that they were uncomfortable with and decided to translate it for lack of a better word, the modern audience. But at the same time, I am also not interested in digging up obscure passages from a 30,000-page tome to work out whether or not the orcs can reproduce sexually, and whether or not this means a family of orcs could actually exist in any conventional form, because I think that distracts from the point that I want to make. This isn't utter shit because it isn't like what Tolkien wrote. It is utter shit because, well, allow me to explain. The writers have decided to portray the orcs as not really wanting to fight, but just wanting a home. It isn't their fault that they weren't born somewhere nice, and they are just as entitled to live a happy life as any other character in Amazon's Middle-earth. And as such, they are just like us.
You went full retard, man.
To state the fucking obvious, the orcs in Amazon's Middle-earth are not just like us. This is not a matter of perspective. When I say that the orcs are pure fucking evil, I don't mean to say that they were born evil and that they are and always will be evil because of some evil magical force that prevents them from being anything else. I mean that they are pure fucking evil because they burned down multiple villages filled with innocent people, including women and children, and then enslaved them. They attacked a woman with her son in her house. They sadistically fuck around with their slaves and murder them arbitrarily to ensure that the others stay in line. They celebrate when they kill their enemies as they try to escape. They attempt to execute an unarmed child. They attack the Southlanders so as to purge them from the lands they consider to be their own, thereby conducting what amounts to a genocide. They execute unarmed prisoners as a form of coercion. They threaten to kill injured women as a form of coercion. They are sadistic, they are violent, they practice slavery. They have no problem murdering women, children, the elderly, the injured, or any other subset of people typically considered in civilized society to be vulnerable. In fact, they will quite happily kill anyone who does not look like them. They are a wholly unsympathetic species. And if the writers genuinely wanted, for some unknown fucking reason, for the audience to feel an amount of empathy with the orcs, then they could have shown intelligence, loyalty, frustration, honor, or any other somewhat human characteristic. Instead, they have been depicted throughout Rings of Power as monsters who walk around going blah, and when they do interact with the other characters, they enslave them, beat them, demean them, and kill them. You cannot depict 100 orcs in your TV show and have 98 of them be barbarians who rape and pillage everything that moves, and then throw in a scared couple holding a baby to try and make me feel sorry for them. That isn't how sympathy works. That isn't how orcs work. That isn't how storytelling works. And so either way you slice this particular throat, this is ham-fisted emotional manipulation of the highest order that also appears to be a total reinvention of the orcs from the source material, and that may or may not also be terribly misguided social commentary. Next up, we are introduced to Damrod, hill troll of the Arid Mithrin. Yes, for any aficionados of the more extreme varieties of heavy metal, those are the vocal talents of Jens Kidman from the genre-defining Swedish progressive metal band Meshuggah. And although we can't exactly tell, the atomic clock himself, Gene Hoglan, is providing the percussion on this track, which is not a crossover I ever envisioned. I like Meshuggah, I like Gene Hoglan, I like Trolls, I like Bear McCreary, I generally like the music in Rings of Power, and I of course like The Lord of the Rings. Which is why it sucks to see all of this work being put into something as awful as Rings of Power. Anyway, Adar welcomes Damrod to Mordor, and he immediately asks,
Where is Sauron?
We then cut away before the conversation can fucking end, and I know that I'm joking about there being rules for writing Rings of Power, but seriously, when I do the final autopsy video, I am going to go through every scene in the show and count how many of them end in dramatic cliffhangers that are designed to build tension and mystery, but are also dreadful in execution because there is no intuitive explanation for what actually happened after the camera stopped rolling. In this case, Adar has contacted a legendary troll to fight alongside them, and has evidently informed him that their objective is to defeat Sauron. Adar does not actually have confirmation that Sauron is still alive, all he has is Halbrand's suggestion that Galadriel and Sauron are working together. Damrod immediately asks, "Where is Sauron?" which indicates that Damrod is here singularly to kill Sauron. Adar's response, therefore, is pretty important, but obviously it is more narratively effective to string the audience along and not reveal anything until they absolutely need to, which means we have to work out what Adar could possibly have said that did not result in Damrod ripping off his loincloth and spinning through the trenches of Mordor like a fucking Beyblade. Adar can only really have said, "Hey bro, so I know I said that we're going to go and kill Sauron, but I don't actually know where he is. But no, don't worry. I sent this dude who I've met like once when he tried to kill me, but actually he doesn't really know where Sauron is. But no, don't worry. He promised me that he would get this information from the elves, and because I released all of my slaves for no reason, I can be certain that he will come back and inform me when he does actually locate Sauron." The only thing we know about Damrod is that he is a legendary big dick troll who kills giants and eats dragon bones. Given that he killed Adar's messenger, it also appears that he will just kill orcs because he feels like it. Damrod evidently needs no provocation, and if he were to start a rampage, you are all dead. Adar, Glug, Glugwife, the Glugling, and all of the Glugling's little friends from school. And yet, because we cut away, we are expected to believe that Adar explained that he actually has no idea where Sauron is, and Damrod was like, "Lol, okay, we chill." Okay, Glug. Glug no want war. Glug want happy. Damrod wants to murder fuck Sauron in the balls. Kills orcs for no reason. Is cool with just kind of waiting. Cut back to Eregion, and we see that Durin and Disa have answered Celebrimbor's invitation. They have arrived, which means holy goddamn, they really are trying to make this all happen as fast as possible. I was expecting that Season 2 would end with the forging of the Dwarven Rings, but my guess appears to have been way the fuck off. Celebrimbor offers aid to the dwarves, as the dwarves aided them, which means Celebrimbor presumably learned about Durin's desire to help Elrond off-screen during Season 1. Celebrimbor is aware of the current crisis facing the dwarves because Anatar is aware. Celebrimbor does not question this because he believes Anatar to be an envoy of the Valar, but Anatar is, of course, Sauron. And so how Sauron knows about the problems of Khazad-dûm, I have absolutely no idea. But let's do the writers a favor and not think too hard about the hows and the whys, because Celebrimbor has kindly offered to make rings of power for the dwarf lords.
You brought us here to barter jewelry.
Because, of course, Durin is an idiot, and Disa is the smart one. I don't like this at all, because this is an oversimplification of their characterization that is generally a relative high point in Rings of Power, that exists purely to deliver exposition to the audience, but the writers appear to have put in extra effort to make sure that Durin is depicted as an idiot. The audience obviously knows that when Celebrimbor says, "We want to make you rings," this carries with it certain implications that Durin would not necessarily understand. But surely it would have been more effective for both Durin and Disa to be like, "Why the fuck do we need rings?" As this would have then shown that neither of them are at all prepared for what is about to happen. But instead, the writers chose to show that Disa knows all about magical elven rings, unlike her silly husband. Also, my understanding was that lesser magical rings were not uncommon in Middle-earth, but then again, this is Amazon's Middle-earth, so anything goes. Celebrimbor's offer is that Durin will provide them with mithril, and in return, he will make rings that will heal the mountain. Disa asks why Celebrimbor has contacted them instead of the king, and he replies that King Durin is really stubborn, and so he will be more likely to accept the offer if it is brought to him by his own son. As the Durins are not currently on speaking terms, Durin suggests that he can't help them, at which point, Anatar enters the game.
We summoned you here to help you. Bringing your father a means of saving his kingdom might be just the way to earn back his respect, perhaps even your inheritance.
Which causes Durin to ask him who he is. While Celebrimbor was explaining to the audience, via Durin, who has been forcibly exploited as an audience surrogate, what these rings are, Anatar acts incredibly suspiciously and no one notices. Later in the scene, Durin asks Anatar who the hell he is, which means he was not introduced off-screen prior to the start of the scene. Which means this highly suspicious elf with a fucking 5-head, whom Durin has never seen before, has just been standing around listening to their conversation. Durin then says,
"And where's Elrond?"
Lindom's restoration demands his full attention. He speaks of you so fondly.
Funny, he's never mentioned you.
Despite not yet knowing Anatar's name, which means he can't know if Elrond ever mentioned him before. Anatar explains that Elrond is not here because he is busy restoring Lindon, and then immediately afterwards he says,
Herald Elrond said he could think of little else than helping his dwarven friends.
Which does not follow on from what he just fucking said. Elrond is busy doing something more important, but also helping you is his top priority because he likes you so much. This dialogue has more clunk than my car after my wife has taken it for a spin. Sorry, honey. So why might the writers choose for Anatar to use these specific words?
Whoever that Anatar is, he doesn't know Elrond from a hole in the ground.
How do you know?
Because Elrond would never say such nice things about me.
Aha!
Doomed, detected, and caught.
It seems the writers need Durin to be suspicious of Anatar, which, let's be real, he fucking should have been anyway. But they figured, yeah, well, Anatar is not quite suspicious enough, so we need him to also accidentally make guesses as to Elrond and Durin's relationship so as to make him appear untrustworthy. On that point, is Sauron omniscient? Because he sometimes seems to be, and other times he seems to not be. He had detailed knowledge of the current crisis at Khazad-dûm. He also knew that the king did not plan to leave Durin with any inheritance when he dies, which is news to me, but given Durin's response, it seems that Anatar was not wrong when he made this claim. But he also did not appear to know what Durin and Elrond's relationship was actually like, which then leads directly into Durin being highly suspicious of Anatar. We don't yet know where this goes, but this essentially amounts to Anatar having very specific bits of information, whilst lacking others, so as to progress the plot. He is, one could say, selectively clairvoyant. Also, Durin was thoroughly depicted in Season 1 as being unreasonably and unjustifiably gullible, and having an extremely short-term memory. This was, no doubt, unintentional, but the fact remains, and so it is very jarring for the writers to suddenly depict Durin as being really clued up and, you can't fool him. Not even beings of such immense power as Sauron, who are specifically shown to be skilled in the art of manipulation. They can't fool Durin. Disa then asks if they can have a sec to think about it, and...
Might we have a wee moment to mull it over?
I am
Certainly.
afraid.
Anatar is, of course, suspicious as fuck, and he is absolutely desperate to get these rings crafted immediately, and he makes no effort to hide it. But he then concedes whilst gritting his teeth and imagining flaying the skin from Celebrimbor's scrotum for wasting his time. As they head outside, Durin tells his wife that he is suspicious of all this because he thinks the idea of magical rings is strange. Disa replies,
That's for your father to decide.
Which is... that's avoiding the question. Disa appeared to know that magical rings were a thing in Amazon's Middle-earth, so surely her response would be, the fuck are you talking about? Magical rings are not uncommon. Disa reveals that she totally agrees with Elrond. She believes that her husband was not wrong in what he said to his father, but she believes that Durin is wrong now in his refusal to present Celebrimbor's offer to him. This is informed by what Disa revealed in episode 2. She is terrified because she can no longer hear the mountain, and she has just been offered a potential solution. However, at no point do either of them consider doing this behind the king's back, which is absolutely something I could imagine Disa at least attempting to convince Durin of after he says there is no way he will present this to his father.
That mithril belongs to us. And together we will rule this mountain and all others before our time is done.
Disa has already been shown in Season 1 to place her loyalty to her husband over her loyalty to her king. She wants to heal the mountain, and she suspects that some evil bullshit is going down. It was also implied moments earlier that she is at least vaguely familiar with the concept of magical rings. She does not share Durin's concern that Anatar is suspicious as fuck because she isn't allowed to, and she appears to believe that it is at least worth a try. Additionally, getting these rings made behind the king's back would then allow her and Durin to gain favour and status with her people, as if the rings work, then they will have managed to resolve the crisis when the king could not. All of which would have been in character for Disa, but it appears that she is more concerned with healing Durin's relationship with his father than she is with healing the mountain. We have drama to resolve, and so Disa does not consider any of the above. She instead says,
Either you bring news of this to your father, or I will.
Of course, this all could have been tightened up dramatically had it been made clear that Durin and Disa cannot acquire mithril unless they convince the king to help. Rather unfortunately, we have no idea how much mithril is in Khazad-dûm. We have no idea how many of these little mithril nuggets exist. We don't know where they are kept. We don't know who has access to them. We don't know the current state of the mithril mine, and so yes, the writers are probably working under the presumption that, well, obviously they've got to convince the king because he's got the mithril in the box and it's impossible for anyone else to ever get their hands on it because it's in his box. But if they wanted it to be clear, then they could easily have dropped in a line to make this clear in this very scene. Okay, Sauron is sus as fuck. Perceptive and untrusting, which is obviously a direct contradiction of how he was characterized in Season 1. And he is also an idiot. Disa values healing the Durin's relationship over fixing the mountain.
There is a saying in Khazad-dûm.
Oh, here we fucking go.
The slow drip splits the boulder.
Why would this be a saying in Khazad-dûm? Dwarves split boulders constantly by swinging axes around. Yes, a slow drip of water can erode rock over decades, so this saying does have an amount of truth to it, but dwarves are not exactly known for biding their time and waiting for things to happen excruciatingly slowly. But you see, Celebrimbor is telling Anatar to give the dwarves time to consider the proposal and not to rush. So it makes sense, you see. Anatar, however, believes that they do not have time because he is evil and he wants to pump out his evil magical rings as quickly as possible. And so he suggests to Celebrimbor that Gil-galad would not approve if he were to find out what they are doing.
Your High King believes the dwarves to be unworthy. In fact, he has forbidden the forging of any more rings at all. And the truth is, he does not even know I am here.
Celebrimbor, having now been given a terminal diagnosis of fuckwit, bends right over and allows Anatar to strum him like a harp, and he prances around like a fabulous little goober, declaring that lives are at stake and they must continue to make the rings, even if it means deceiving the High King. The writers, of course, need the rings to be forged in secret, and so this lie from Anatar is used as justification. Sauron needs this to be done in secret so that he can take over the world, but for Celebrimbor to agree to work in secret, he needs to be convinced that the High King would not approve. Just one teeny tiny problem. Celebrimbor was established in Season 1 as being extremely loyal to the High King, because Celebrimbor knew that Gil-galad was deceiving Elrond and using him to acquire mithril, but he went along with this in spite of the fact that he did not want to.
Elrond, forgive me. I did not tell you sooner. I begged him to allow you into our confidence from the start.
Also, you remember what I said about alarm bells? Well, this right here should be causing Celebrimbor to at least consider some of the questions that I proposed in Part 2. However, as I have the gift of foresight, I was able to quite accurately predict that Celebrimbor would not recognize that there are some unanswered questions regarding Anatar, and so he says,
"What business is it of his how I conduct myself in my own realm?"
Because, honestly, the High King of the Elves, he can just go fuck himself at this point. This Anatar dude seems chill, and I don't really know anything about him, but he appears to be really good at magic, so he's probably trustworthy, even though he has demonstrated repeatedly that he is desperate to make a load of magical rings, that he repeatedly conceals his true identity from people, and that he is working directly against the wishes of the High King of the Elves. You can do this kind of thing in a story if you really want to. You can have a character's allegiance flip due to a change in priorities or new information coming to light or any number of other things. What the writers of Rings of Power seem to be leaning rather heavily on, however, is the fact that Sauron is good at manipulating people, and he is capable of sculpting reality and fucking around with people's brains. Which means, essentially, that what Celebrimbor believes to be true is an entirely irrelevant question. Celebrimbor believes whatever the writers want him to believe, because he believes whatever Sauron wants him to believe. And so I'm not going to bother coming back to this point again for the rest of this series. Celebrimbor is no longer a character with his own desires. He is a puppet both of Anatar and of the writers, and so his personality, his reasoning, and the decisions that he makes can no longer be attributed to him. Because if he does something really fucking dumb, then the defense will always be, well, you see, Sauron made him do it. Celebrimbor then decides to conceal everything from Gil-galad.
This is my moment. No, he will not take it away.
He tells Anatar that he will write a letter to Gil-galad, congratulating him on healing the Tree of Symbolism, and informing him that he is closing down the forge. This seems like a strange lie, because it would surely be at least somewhat obvious whether or not the forge is in operation, as it requires multiple people to operate, and it produces steam, smoke, and occasionally explosions that can be seen from a distance. Either way, the cogs turn in Sauron's mind as he tries to work out if he left any bandits on the road from Eregion to Lindon who might accidentally slide back into the story and intercept another letter. But because contrivances are a one-way street in Amazon's Middle-earth, it seems fairly likely that this letter will indeed reach Gil-galad in a timely fashion. Right, Celebrimbor does what he is told like a good little boy. Cut to Mordor, and Isildur is riding Berek to safety. Everyone members the dead marshes, and he stumbles upon a load of dead Númenóreans who appear to have been killed by orcs. He is stabbed by a rather large knife with, maybe an 8-inch blade, and it appears to go directly into his thigh. This nice lady then says, "Sorry." And everything's okay. Then they start cracking jokes about how she just stabbed him.
Doesn't hurt. Oh. Doesn't hurt. Of course it hurts. I just stabbed you in the thigh.
Which certainly helps the writers establish a serious tone where actions have consequences and where getting stabbed in the fucking leg whilst behind enemy lines can be a death sentence, as even though you may have a horse, you have rather large arteries in your leg, and even if you close the wound, you may well still bleed out internally very quickly. But it doesn't matter because it's comedy time. Woo!
Let me pull it out.
No, don't! You're meant to leave it in.
Was I?
Yes, whenever you're stabbed, you're meant to leave it in.
I've never been stabbed before.
Oh, neither have I.
You sure it doesn't hurt?
Fucking Christ, we've known this new character for about 10 seconds and she already makes me want to claw my eyes out of my skull, bleach them and then put them back in. Anyway, they don't seal the wound, they tie a thing on it, and this is sufficient for him to survive what must have been a multiple-day journey on horseback. Estrid then informs Isildur that the other Númenóreans have left because, as I covered in Season 1, they arrived, packed up, and left seemingly within about 24 hours. But Isildur is confident that his father is still totally looking for him, and his father actually, started looking for him, and his father, thought about looking for him. Yeah, for those of you who have forgotten the infinitely memorable Episode 7 of Season 1, Elendil was told off-screen that Isildur was missing and or dead, and he was just like, "All right." And neither wanted to confirm and see it with his own eyes, nor did he try and argue with the others that they need to turn around, only to be told no. This could have been a good scene, Elendil pleading to be allowed to turn around to find his son, only to be told by Afrock, "No, Isildur is dead. I saw it with my own eyes. He's gone." At which point Elendil breaks down crying. The reason this did not happen is because Isildur is not dead. And so nothing any of those other characters could have reasonably said to Elendil should have convinced him not to try and find his son. And of course, the writers are experts at cock-teasing the audience by cutting away just before something dramatic is about to happen and then cutting back and leaving the audience to fill in the fucking blanks.
I found this. Here. There's a path marked.
My god, have the writers just planted a fucking map in Isildur's hands by having him accidentally bump into a woman who went to the encampment previously and accidentally found a map that the Númenóreans accidentally left behind? Does the Pope shit in the woods? I really can't take much more of this.
Hey! Listen!
The hell is happening now?
Random. Ah! It's not bad writing for things to happen by accident. Stop being a bigot and educate yourself about subtext.
Stop trying to defend the indefensible, retarded alter ego. This is awful writing. Because the writers have placed Isildur in a scenario in which he should be dead multiple times over. And they have plonked this convenient new character directly in his path, who somehow has all the answers he needs. God damn it, history is repeating itself. Why do you never learn anything? Isildur just so happens to bump into a woman who has previously been to the encampment and found it abandoned so that Isildur doesn't have to go himself. She grabbed a map to give Isildur something to do next, and this map has a little circle on it drawn around a place called Pelargir. If he had not randomly bumped into her, he would have gone to the encampment and been like, oh. If the Númenóreans hadn't accidentally left a map behind, or if Estrid had not found the map, he would have bumped into Estrid and been like, oh, the way you transform this insane string of contrivances, and thereby make the story more believable, more interesting, more justifiable, and more coherent, is you give the characters a reason to do all of the above. Which is called fucking script writing. Maybe Isildur found an abandoned camp full of supplies and started loading food into Berek's saddlebags, only to be attacked by Estrid, who wanted the food for herself. Then have them both travel to the encampment and find the map that the Númenóreans deliberately left behind to tell any survivors where to go next. This would be justified by the desires of the characters in question and would therefore be a chain of causation you can actually follow, rather than random bullshit happening because the writers really want Isildur to go to Pelargir under the belief that this is where his father is. Why are you still here? How do I make you go away?
You just have to ask me nicely.
Okay, please leave me alone.
I'll be back when you need me.
I fucking hope not. Anyway, this might sound like a really anal question, but how did the Númenóreans leave their encampment? Because if they just kind of left all of the tents and shit and hopped on the boat and then they're gone, then okay. I guess Estrid found this map in a tent that was abandoned because the Númenóreans were desperate to leave immediately for some reason. But that is not what happened.
Nothing left but hoofprints and mud.
The Númenóreans tore down the encampment, leaving seemingly nothing behind, apart from this delightfully devilish plot device. Isildur continues to be lucky. Can't die. Believes his father didn't abandon him. And Estrid stabs people and then jokes about it. Having now stumbled across a girl version of himself, someone who is just as clumsy and scatterbrained as he is, Isildur and his new bestest buddy in the whole wide world travel to Pelargir, and when I say travel, I am using that word generously because it appears to happen within the space of about 5 minutes. They find a dude with a cart who appears to be nearly dead, and he claims that he was attacked by orcs, although the fact that he is still alive would poke a teeny tiny hole in that story, unless he was lucky enough to have been attacked by Glug, who really didn't want to, but Glug have to provide for Glugwife and Glugling. The eternally perceptive Isildur decides to give the man some food, and rather predictably, this turns out to be a trap. We, the audience, see that this man has the mark of Sauron branded on his arm, which is meant to be the moment we realize that this man is evil, but Isildur does not know what the mark of Sauron is, or what it means, so in order to give Isildur a reason to be suspicious, he notices that this man has less teeth than Gollum, and they have the man reach for his stick rather unsubtly. This is yet another example of the writers having their characters act retarded in order to provide the most maximum of maximum drama. As soon as we consider what these men want, this scene ceases to make any sense. They are either trying to capture Isildur and Estrid to bring them to Adar so that they can be enslaved, or alternatively, they are attacking them because they want their food and horse. So, naturally, they wait until the worst possible time to attack them, rather than going when Isildur's back is turned. They open by bonking Isildur with a plank of wood instead of using the sword that they appear to have access to, and they take their sweet time in executing him. In summary, had these clowns not acted like clowns, Isildur would, once again, have died. But anyway, Isildur is rescued at the last possible moment, for maximum drama, of course, by everyone's favourite character, Arondir, who does a sweet backflip and jumps through the cart with such awesome acrobatics that it disintegrates. Then this guy falls over for no reason, and Arondir efficiently dispatches most of the other bandits.
Wild men outnumber us many to one in these woods.
Hey now, Arondir, that is rather bigoted of you. These aren't wild men at all. Remember Glug? They just want a home. They just like Glug. Who are you to deny them that right? Also, if there are so many wild men here, then how exactly did Isildur manage to get all the way to Pelargir before crossing paths with any?
I have no fucking idea.
Yeah. They were all off screen. Isildur. Luck. And is idiot. Estrid. Smart and not idiot. Arondir. Acrobat man. Now you may be wondering, why was Arondir in the woods and thus able to save Isildur's life?
An old Númenórean colony. Pelargir, they called it. They say there's fresh land, fresh water.
And so it makes sense that Arondir, Bronwyn, and Theo would be in Pelargir. As for why Arondir is here on the outskirts specifically and is therefore able to save Isildur's life, well, he just so happened to be in this neck of the woods gathering sticks so that he could... Bronwyn is dead.
Oh no.
What do I even say about this? Did this happen because the actress decided not to return for season 2? Did they decide not to recast her and thought, she can die, no biggie? Which means everything that I said about Bronwyn in my final autopsy of season 1 is in fact all there is to know about Bronwyn. Bronwyn's story was that she loved Arondir and her son Theo, despite occasionally forgetting that they existed. She convinced the villagers of Tirharad to evacuate to Osterith, whereupon she was in charge because she just kind of was. She nearly died, then she was okay, and then she headed to a safe settlement with Arondir and Theo after the Númenóreans abandoned the Southlanders, and then she died off-screen as a result of her injury. Had the writers actually had the balls to kill her off in episode 6, then I would have been like, okay, these are some meaningful consequences. The Southlanders followed Bronwyn, came up with a really fucking stupid plan that involved blowing up their own defenses, and Bronwyn died as a direct result. This was obviously not intended by the writers, but that would have at least made sense. revealing that actually she died seemingly very recently 5 episodes later, as they are only just now giving her a funeral, very much seems as though the writers wrote her out of the story because the actress was unavailable. If we ignore external factors like the actress's availability, Bronwyn dying off-screen just prior to the events of episode 3 of season 2 does not make any narrative sense whatsoever, and rather than having her die as a consequence of the events of the battle in season 1, she appears to have been deleted from the story entirely, hence the funeral taking place just as Isildur arrives. Since episode 6, Bronwyn has done absolutely nothing. She has served no narrative purpose, and so she could have been killed off then instead of now. One idea that would have the potential to deepen Theo's relationship with Arondir would have been for Bronwyn to bleed out after being shot, for Theo to become really fucking angry with Arondir for not protecting his mother, and for Arondir to then hand over the evil sword in exchange for Adar sparing Theo rather than Bronwyn. The funeral itself is quite an effective scene, in large part due to some fantastic music. Arondir is struggling to bring himself to light the pyre, but Theo takes the torch and does it himself before walking off and looking out to sea. Arondir attempts to console Theo, but Theo brushes him off. This is an effective depiction of grief. It is also entirely accomplished through visuals and music, and is therefore not neutered by any of Rings of Power's trademark terrible dialogue. Just imagine how effective this scene could have been had Bronwyn, Theo, and Arondir been properly characterized in Season 1, and if Bronwyn's death was a part of the plot rather than something that happened for reasons entirely unrelated to the story they are telling. We then cut back to Khazad-dûm, where the children are hungry and the dwarves appear to be running dangerously low on food. Na'vi appeals to the king to open the royal grain reserves, go away, Zach, which suggests that the dwarves may not have a means of trading with the surface. As Durin and Disa recently left and then came back, they absolutely do have a means of trading with the surface, and although this would of course not be a long-term or a wide-scale solution to their problem, it is something that could have been addressed. Maybe have the king order a group of dwarves to leave the city and trade for what they can from nearby settlements, even if the closest settlement is Eregion, which is about a day's walk away. Instead, Rings of Power is treating Khazad-dûm as if it exists on an island, totally unconnected to the rest of Middle-earth. But anyway, at long last, Durin enters the king's chamber, and we are treated to the long-awaited reunion of father and son.
I'm hard as you, stubborn as you, as crusted with pride, and I was wrong.
Given that Durin was very much opposed to this idea, let's consider the reasons why he may have made this decision. Khazad-dûm is in some pretty deep shit. He has apparently lost his inheritance. He has to eat year-old bread. His children are refusing to eat because their food is shit. He is failing to provide for his family, and he is failing to be a good father. This is sufficient, as he was established as placing high value in demonstrating worthiness of one's father's name.
The mightiest thing a dwarf can do is to be worthy of the name of his father.
And so if he is failing to be a father himself, then this is absolutely a coherent motivation drawn from one of his core values. For some reason, however, the writers have also decided that Durin needed to be bullied at work for having soft little baby hands that have never held an axe before, and they also go one step further in this scene and imply that Durin was physically beaten on more than one occasion.
You look terrible. Miners have calloused fists.
Which, I'm sorry, I don't buy that for a fucking moment. But anyway, Durin explains Celebrimbor's proposal and says that he felt it was his duty to bring the offer to the king, regardless of their estrangement, and rather importantly, regardless of the fact that Durin himself believes that it would be a bad idea to accept this proposal.
Father, there's power in Eregion. I don't trust it.
Durin essentially extends an olive branch of trust to his father, and provides him with a solution that he himself does not agree with, thereby trusting that his father will value his own judgment. Durin is, seemingly, entirely honest about how he feels about Celebrimbor's proposal, despite the fact that Disa appears to be on board and that Celebrimbor believes these rings will solve all of their problems. We already know that King Durin values Prince Durin's intuition, and Durin says to his father, "You told me once that the fate of the elves is decided by wiser minds than our own. To try and alter it might lead to greater catastrophe. I keep wondering, what if you were right?" This is either Durin saying what he believes the king wants to hear, or Durin's mind has changed completely off-screen during the day or so that it will have taken for him to travel home from Eregion. King Durin provided this exact justification for not providing Mithril to the elves in Season 1. He believed that it was the Valar's will that the elves leave Middle-earth or die. The show keeps changing its mind about that. Durin, however, defied his father's wishes due to his friendship with Elrond. He didn't want his friend to die. Now that he has been informed that the elves made magical rings and fixed their tree of symbolism, he appears to have reconsidered. Maybe I should have let my friend die, because in saving themselves, the elves may be risking a far greater catastrophe. If the writers have indeed reached into Durin's brain and made him genuinely have second thoughts about saving Elrond, then this is one of the biggest moments of character assassination that we have had so far in Rings of Power. Granted, there aren't too many characters to assassinate, but even so, the king explained all of this to Durin back in episode 7 of Season 1, and Durin was like, "Fuck you, you're old and wrong." And then he took tremendous risks to try and save his friend. Not just the risk of defying his king and losing his lordship, but also the physical risk of going into the Mithril Mine, but everyone's forgotten that the Mithril Mine is dangerous, so what can you do? Until we see what this actually leads to, however, I am still holding on to a thread of hope. Rings of Power has done its best to destroy my ability to be hopeful. But Durin has not yet been assassinated, because he has only spoken about his doubts. The gun is very much cocked and loaded. If he starts to act upon these doubts, however, the trigger will have been pulled. Sucks up his pride and apologizes. May now believe that he should have let Elrond die. And King Durin appreciates the apology. Cut back to my other two favourite characters, Theo and Isildur. Theo is stitching Isildur's leg wound, which makes a bit of sense as Bronwyn was a healer, and so Theo would probably know how to do this. As for why Isildur is still alive after receiving a similar wound to Bronwyn, I guess there is something in the water back in Numenor.
The sea!
Anyway, we learn that Arondir blames himself for failing to stop Adar and failing to protect Bronwyn. He thought she was getting better, until one day Ramadan Bonsai didn't show up on set, at which point the writers scrambled to come up with something and landed on...
There is a foulness in all arrows, not easily forgotten by human flesh.
Well, I will take what little I can get. At least they didn't retroactively decide that this was a Morgul shaft. Arondir then reassures Isildur that Numenor will return, and his family will be whole again, which causes Theo to feel... whatever this face is meant to convey. I always struggle with Theo because he emotes as though he is just now learning what emotions are, and he is still working out how to use the various muscles in his face to convey these emotions. You know how when really, really young children try to act and they kind of contort their faces until it approximately looks like when adults exhibit genuine emotions? That's pretty much all this kid does. And Tyrone Mo-fucking Aladdin is 19 at the time of recording, so he really doesn't have the same excuse most kids have. By far, the most emotionally effective part of his story was the previous scene, where we could not see his face. Anyway, Arondir tells Theo that Pelargir needs a healer. Theo refuses because depression. Arondir then explains that his home, Beleriand, was an entire realm that is now underwater. He says that he was angry at Morgoth after it fell, which indicates that Morgoth is the reason why Beleriand is now underwater. And he continues that he was also angry with himself, and that Theo should stop being angry with himself.
Mission accomplished.
Now, this is what I like to call the gourmet spacco, the spice melange of broken dialogue. Arondir, moments earlier, said,
I failed to stop Adar, failed to protect her.
He directly blames himself for what happened to Bronwyn, and although he does not externally appear to be angry, this can be attributed to the fact that Arondir has one single facial expression. This means he is telling Theo, hey kiddo, so I know you feel really angry about what happened to your mum, but if you want my advice, just try blaming yourself instead of being angry with yourself. Because those are two totally different things. I guess it is possible to blame yourself for something and not feel angry at yourself for having caused it. But at the same time, these two emotions are so closely linked that when speaking about the guilt of causing someone else's death, they may as well be the same thing. And why the fuck does Arondir think that Theo is angry with himself? And even if we just accept that, yeah, fine, Theo is furious with himself for doing literally the exact thing that his mother told him to do during the battle, even directly saving her life at one point by giving the evil sword to Adar, Arondir's story about how he is also familiar with the emotion of anger is not comparable whatsoever. Arondir was a soldier who lost a battle. He was angry with himself because he would have believed that if he had just fought that little bit harder, he may have been able to save his home. It was directly his responsibility to protect Beleriand, and he failed to do so. Conversely, it was not Theo's responsibility to protect Bronwyn. It was her responsibility to protect him. She took an arrow in the process and apparently died off-screen a few days later. Theo is clearly suffering from survivor's guilt, which is confirmed in the next scene and should be pretty fucking obvious to Arondir, who knows more than we do about what actually happened to Bronwyn. But for some reason, Arondir thinks that Theo is angry with himself and implies that Theo is mad because he didn't fight hard enough to save his mother. Theo then says that Arondir was not his father, and so Arondir means nothing to him anymore now that Bronwyn is dead, and he does not wish to speak to Arondir again. This is framed as though Theo has reverted to his old ways. His arc in Season 1 has been undone due to the trauma of losing his mother, and he now sees Arondir as another pointy-eared asshole. What the writers could have done here, actually, I need to stop saying that because the writers evidently could not have done better, otherwise they fucking would have. What the writers should have done here is have Theo acknowledge that Arondir has no fucking clue what he is feeling at this moment. Theo is seemingly tormented because his mother died to save him, and Arondir has just said, "Back in my day, I lived in Beleriand, and then it got sunk, and I was angry at myself for not stopping it from being sunk. And that is when I learned that you being angry at yourself is a bad thing to be. But blaming yourself, on the other hand, that's totally cool." The writers, of course, don't seem to understand that Arondir's sentiment makes absolutely no sense. It is not applicable, and it is also hypocritical, given the fact that Arondir does not appear to have learned what he claims to have learned. Which means the prospect of Theo calling him out on his bullshit is little more than a pipe dream, a fart on the wind. Okay, Arondir doesn't understand the difference between grief and anger, and Theo emotes. Isildur then has a chat with Theo, who asks him why he left Numenor.
This is from old Numenor.
It's an aqueduct.
Men can't build things like that.
In Numenor we can.
If it's so grand, why'd you leave?
Theo, trust me when I tell you, you do not want to open that can of worms. I have spent enough time gathering those worms. Please do not ask Isildur to explain himself.
Heard there were grander things in Middle-earth.
Why'd you have to make this so fucking complicated?
This is just not true. Isildur is many things, but at his core he seems to be a patriot. He wants to do something he considers to be worthy of Numenor, and although what he considers changes in every scene he is in, what does not change is that he wants to prove himself to his nation. But I guess now we can add the fact that he wanted to get out and see all the really cool shit that they have in Middle-earth. Really cool shit that does not exist. Because as he literally fucking says in this very scene, they build really cool shit like this aqueduct all the time in Numenor. And as we have seen, Numenor is the pinnacle of technology in Amazon's Middle-earth. They have all the best shit, and there is no reason why Isildur would believe otherwise. Anyway, sensing that we are getting dangerously close to the end of the episode, Theo asks,
"Do you really want your horse back?"
And Isildur responds, "Yeah, if you point me in the right direction, then sure."
You know where he is?
And Theo tells Isildur to meet him here later tonight. I have no idea why Theo has decided to help Isildur endanger himself to get his horse back, but I am certainly looking forward to whatever is about to happen. Probably the two most useless characters in the entire show are about to go on a little mini-adventure to rescue Isildur's horse. Shenanigans of the highest order will no doubt ensue. Okay, Isildur went to Middle-earth because he wanted to go on an adventure. Theo helps Isildur for some reason. Isildur then has a chat with Estrid, and by this point I'm honestly just fucking bored. Why do I do this to myself? I'm actually going to pause the recording right here and go and walk my dog because I need a break from uncharacterized characters yapping bullshit at each other. I'll be right back. Okay, right, where were we? So Isildur has a chat with this new chick whose name I can't remember. It turns out her betrothed is not here, and Isildur says that he will make it if he is half as strong as she is.
I'm not so strong as you think.
Well, I'll be gosh darned. So far we have known this woman for about 5 minutes, and in that time she has survived alone in Mordor since the eruption, travelled to and from the Numenorean encampment, ambushed Isildur, I know he is totally useless, but even useless people have eyes, recognised a trap and been far more cautious than Isildur, indicating that she is far more competent than Isildur. But she claims that she is not as strong as he thinks. Why not? Well, it is revealed momentarily that she has been branded with the mark of Sauron. She waits until Isildur is gone and mutilates her own skin with a red-hot knife. Why? She isn't evil, nor does the presence of the Mark of Sauron indicate that someone is evil. Her introduction to this story was literally her accidentally attacking Isildur, believing him to be an orc. And you may be thinking, well, maybe she killed those Númenóreans and attacked Isildur fully intending to kill him as well, because she was asked really nicely to do so by Glug's bowling partner Blarp. But if this were the case, she would obviously then finish the job. So, whatever is a not evil person who has been branded with the mark of their enemy to do? Tell the other refugees, yeah, I got captured and branded and enslaved, but then I escaped. Please, can I have some help? No, of course not, because anyone who sees this mark will automatically assume that you are as evil as as evil as Sauron, even though Adar took many slaves, and even though he appears to have released all of them for no reason, which would mean that surely this is not a one-off occurrence. As I am recording this, I just had a horrifying idea that I actually hope that this comes true. I think I may have just worked out Sauron's retarded plan. So he went back to the Southlands and told Adar, you need to free the slaves. And then Adar did so, which means that there are now a whole load of people running around the Southlands bearing the mark of Sauron. And I was just thinking to myself just then while recording this, why might it benefit Sauron to have a whole load of people running around with a little mark on their skin? I put it to you, dear viewer, that everyone bearing the mark of Sauron is a sleeper agent, and that Sauron is going to magically activate the mark of Sauron and mind control them so that they start fighting on his side. I know, that sounds a little bit far-fetched. It is also unbearably stupid, but at the same time, it does fit in with everything that Sauron has done so far. Anyway, let's keep going. I can understand that maybe Estrid, that's her name, Estrid, she did not want to have the mark of her captor branded on her skin forever, but the fact that she is removing it in the middle of the night by herself using a heated piece of metal suggests that she believes she has something to hide, which doesn't exactly make sense. This is what she meant when she said earlier that she was not as strong as Isildur thought, which makes zero sense, because as we have seen, you either kneel before Adar, or you are immediately stabbed, twisted, and gutted. Which means, yeah, I guess she thinks that if she really was as strong as Isildur claims, she would be dead. Anyway, prior to branding herself, she tells Isildur that she is suffering from survivor's guilt, which prompts Isildur to reveal a part of his backstory. Isildur lost his mother when he was 10.
The sea is always right!
He went swimming further than he was supposed to.
The sea is always right.
He got caught in a riptide.
The sea is always right.
And she drowned whilst saving him.
The sea is always right!
So this perhaps explains Elendil's occasional irritation with Isildur, and also perhaps explains his obscene dogmatic devotion to the sea always being right, as it allows him to not blame his idiot son for his wife's death. Isildur continues that he sometimes sees his mother in his dreams, which may be referring to the two separate occasions in Season 1, when Isildur heard his name being called whilst out sailing. But this is not elaborated on, and so it remains unclear. Isildur then explains that he has felt bound to try and do something singular, something special, to find a way to earn what she did. Well, dear boy, you are doing a piss-poor job, you have repeatedly disgraced your family, and I'm not going through all of that again, sorry. Anyway, Theo watches and listens and starts crying because he also believes that Bronwyn died because of him, and Estrid then explains what happened to her mum and no one cares. Right, fucking Theo, survivor's guilt. Estrid, survivor's guilt. Isildur, survivor's guilt. It's like poetry. It rhymes. Theo then shows up and oh boy, it's time. These two catatonic train wrecks are going on a quest to rescue Isildur's horse because it got nicked earlier because the writers needed to fill time in episode 3. Theo knows exactly where the wild men are camping because of course he does. They both arrive at the camp because the script said enter Theo and Isildur. Berek, the fucking horse that was terminally unchillable, is now cooler than Arnold Schwarzenegger's wife in Batman and Robin, and he is just kind of standing there obediently with his weird oversized head thinking about whatever horses think about. The wild men start to become suspicious because the horses are making horse noises, and Theo then walks up to them like, hey, can I sit at the cool table? In an attempt to convince the wild men that he is one of them, Theo claims that he also serves Adar. Now, Rings of Power seems to be treating these wild men as if they are religious zealots, and that when they bent the knee, they were from that point on forced to serve Adar. We have no reason to assume this. Theo has no reason to assume this. It would be entirely reasonable for these wild men to have been branded and enslaved, and then they either escaped or were released and banded together attacking passers-by in order to survive. Theo is evidently aware enough of who this group of so-called wild men are to know where their camp is, but there is no way that he could know that they actually serve Adar. Indeed, the fact that they are here, outside of Mordor, chilling in the woods and attacking random travelers, would be strong evidence that they do not serve Adar. And if these guys do not serve Adar and recently escaped their hellish enslavement, and then this kid walks up like, hey guys, hail Adar, then they would just grab him and spit roast him over the fire. But it is strongly implied in this very scene that these wild men are absolutely loyal to Adar, which means that I have no idea why they are here. Anyway, Theo reveals the scar on his arm left by the evil sword, and he claims that he has done more for Adar than any of them. Although he does not explain this at all, and so they're just like, it's just a random scar, the fuck are you talking about? And this causes Theo to get captured. Congratulations, you fucking spanner. They guess that Theo has come from Pelargir, and they worry that he is here to attack them, because naturally when a group of wild men encounter one single boy in the woods, the natural assumption is that they are under attack. The wild men believe for some reason that people from Pelargir attacked 3 of their camps, thereby giving them a justification for attacking random people on the road. They just want a home. They didn't choose to become bandits. Rings of Power is going hard on this moral ambiguity deconstruction of evil bullshit that it pulled earlier with Glug, Glugwife, and Glugling, but the problem here is that the show simultaneously wants us to accept that these guys just want somewhere to live and they didn't choose to be evil, but also wants us to accept that everyone operates with the understanding that if someone has been branded with the mark of Sauron, then this means they are evil. Anyway, they move to grab Theo, and an axe flies out of the darkness and hits one of the wild men, allowing Theo the opportunity to escape, which means the only reason Theo is alive is because of blind luck. Turns out it doesn't turn out anything because the show conceals this information from us to hook us in for episode 4. Someone starts attacking the wild men, and we never see who, because Mystery Box, fuck you, tune in next week, you dick muppet, because we are going to drip feed content into your bloodstream like never before. Not too much in one go, mind you, wouldn't want you to actually experience a story, we just want you to feel like you are experiencing a story. Whoever the mystery attackers are, they kill the wild men, but they do not kill Theo. Theo is instead grabbed by something big. The obvious guess is Damrod, the fucking mahusive troll we saw earlier, but then again, the writers could be misdirecting us, so either way, we have to wait until later to find out what just happened. Also, Theo of course couldn't see this gigantic mystery attacker, because the camera was of course pointing the other way. Which means if this is indeed Damrod, then he may be a newcomer to Rings of Power, but he has been trained well in the art of following the first rule. When something is off-screen, it does not exist. Isildur, meanwhile, has grabbed Berek and left, which means he just kind of abandoned Theo whilst he was sweet-talking the wild men. We actually saw Isildur sneaking off with Berek as the wild men said, look how fed he is, I bet he comes from Pelargir, which means Isildur straight up does not give 2 shits about Theo and just wanted his horse. Except that now, when he hears Theo call for help, Isildur stops. Theo! The fuck did you think was going to happen? You just left it. See, I knew that this exact kind of bullshit was going to go down as soon as I realized that these 2 mouth breathers were going on a super secret mission to rescue a fucking horse. Okay, Isildur cares about Theo, but also doesn't care about Theo. Theo is dumb, and Damrod is maybe sneaky. Coronation time. Miriel is wearing white, which means she likes things that happened in the past. Pharazôn is wearing red because it means he likes things that haven't happened yet. Elendil is wearing blue because the sea is always right. Lord Buggernuts is wearing green because he likes chicken nuggies. General Titus is wearing red and blue because he is having an identity crisis. And Jesus of Nazareth is wearing orange because he is partial to the smell of rain on a midsummer's eve. As Miriel reaches for the scepter, someone in the crowd yells, "Queen of Lies!" And Miriel says that she hears the people's sorrow and anger, and that she shares it.
We have bloodied. And been bloodied.
She is so fucking close to acknowledging the actual reason why she should feel sorrow and anger, but the writers don't understand this, so therefore Miriel is eternally handicapped. Miriel continues,
But know this, we will find our course.
That sounds remarkably like you are looking to the future, my dear. Are you sure you chose the right color for your dress? Anyway, she asks that if anyone else wants to protest, they ask themselves, do they cry out for those already dead, for their kingdom, or for themselves?
For Isildur!
Given the fact that this episode has slapped us in the balls and or balginas with the symbolic meaning of different colored dresses, why did they not have Arianne show up in a red dress, so as to visually symbolize the fact that she has aligned herself with Pharazôn and wants Numenor to move forward? Arianne explains that in his dying words, King Tar Palantir spoke to her and informed her that Miriel took counsel from the Palantir. The king also took counsel from the Palantir, of course, which means that this is not what the king said to Arondir in his dying words, which means that Arondir is lying, and presumably she is doing so because Pharazôn convinced her to do so. She continues that the Palantir is the reason why their people died in the Southlands. So, presumably, this has yet to be revealed, which is a very dangerous thing to assume with Rings of Power, but Arondir can't know all of this. If she touched the Palantir, as was heavily implied at the end of Season 1, then she will have seen the same vision of Númenor being flooded. I know that this is not how Palantiri work, but this is how they have been shown to work in Rings of Power. So, armed with the knowledge that Miriel has a crystal ball that shows the flooding of Númenor, she then told Pharazôn that maybe they can use the Palantir to turn the power of many into the power of enough, which would then require that Arondir knew that the reason Miriel went to war is because she wanted to avoid the flooding of Númenor, which isn't even why Miriel went to war. Because back in episode 4 of season 1, Galadriel failed to convince her using this exact reasoning. Miriel ultimately did what she did because she saw a sign from the gods. Which means that, once again, we have two options. Either Arondir is knowingly chatting shit because she really does not like Miriel, or she has connected dots that don't exist and worked out exactly what the writers think is what happened because the Palantir explained everything to her, or, in other words, the writers put this idea in her head and justified it due to in-universe magical bullshit. Pharazôn then suggests that Arondir is lying and says,
Númenor's true ruler would never place trust in an elvish artifact.
And he orders that the Palantir be destroyed before Miriel reveals that it belongs to her. This next part I almost like, because it almost works. It's cute when they try. The writers try to leverage Elendil's characterization in a way that makes the crowd turn on Miriel rather conclusively. Miriel says,
"We need it."
And as soon as he hears her say this, Elendil immediately walks over to the Palantir to grab it and to prevent Pharazôn or the guards from destroying it. This is a very small thing to highlight, but it is clear characterization that I do appreciate. Elendil is highly devoted to Miriel, to the point where he will carry out her wishes even when she has not explicitly ordered him to do so, and even though she has just revealed that she has been running Númenor by talking to a crystal ball. The problem with this, however, is that when he touches the Palantir, it zaps him across the room, thereby revealing to the crowd that this device is some kind of elven sorcery. Why did the Palantir zap him in this manner when it did not do so before when either Miriel, her father, Galadriel, or Arondir used it? Yeah, I don't know, but how does the saying go?
The sea is always...
Things escalate pretty quickly, but before anything too bad can happen to Miriel, an eagle shows up, and Lord Buggernuts decides that the eagle has favored Pharazôn. Damn it. We're nearly at the end. We've got this. We can do this. Every few episodes, something like this happens, and I just don't know what to think. I don't know where to start. I don't know if I am missing some key piece of information that the writers have accidentally forgotten to give me, and I don't know if this is as a consequence of the incessant need to end every fucking scene with a cliffhanger without explaining what just happened. So, I will assume that the writers consider that this had been adequately explained in this episode, and that none of my questions will be answered in future. What is the importance of the image of an eagle? Eagles have not been mentioned at any point in the previous 10 episodes, and I know this because I fucking checked to make sure I wasn't taking crazy pills. The only mention of an eagle prior to the arrival of the eagle is earlier in this episode, where Miriel tells Pharazôn what clothing her father wore to his coronation.
My father wore white. That's all I can recall. That and an eagle.
Miriel is describing what she remembers her father wearing, and she says, he wore white, that's all I remember, that and an eagle, indicating that he wore an eagle, perhaps in the form of an emblem or a sigil. Pharazôn responds that it is rare for an eagle to grace a coronation, but that if an eagle made an appearance at hers, it would be seen as an auspicious omen. This is yet another example of the writers misdirecting their audience by having characters speak in a very specific manner so that they can do a big surprise reveal at the end of the episode and go,
"Ah, see, they were actually talking about a real eagle. I bet you didn't see that coming, you fucking idiots."
No, of course we didn't see it coming, because you have repeatedly demonstrated that you have no idea how dialogue works. You have a child's understanding of grammar. You repeatedly throw in non sequiturs seemingly without realizing. And you have a fascinating habit of tricking the audience and hiding information from them before taking a shit on the chessboard and strutting around acting as though you have just done something clever. Miriel recalls that her father wore white and also wore an eagle, but the writers have her speak in such a way that they can pretend that they tricked the audience, and that actually Miriel remembers that her father wore white and also, unrelated to the wearing of the white thing that he wore, remembered that there was a fucking eagle at the coronation. The presence of a giant eagle is discussed so casually as one might discuss the presence of a dog, which doesn't work because not only have eagles not been seen or mentioned once in Rings of Power, outside of a brief glimpse during the prologue war against Morgoth, but they are acknowledged in this very scene to only appear very rarely, so rarely that they are considered to be omens. The appearance of an eagle is seemingly a once-in-a-lifetime event, and both Miriel and Pharazôn discuss it as if it were no more important than a buttonhole pin you might wear at a wedding. Why would I expect a giant fucking eagle to literally turn up and watch the coronation? I am aware that giant eagles exist within Middle-earth, but they have not appeared nor have they been mentioned prior to this episode. But anyway, this reveals that when Miriel said she remembered an eagle, she meant that very literally. So, why is there an eagle? Did the eagle deliberately show up at exactly the right time? Did Pharazôn or someone else summon the eagle? Why does the eagle have a vested interest in Numenor's political leadership? Did the eagle choose Pharazôn to lead Numenor? Why do the people believe that the eagle did choose Pharazôn? Was all of this pre-planned by Pharazôn? All of this is just completely ignored, and no, I'm at the point now where I'm not going to hold out hope. Pharazôn wins because eagle is a liar, possibly because of Pharazôn. Pharazôn is a manipulator and might be able to control eagles. We then get our obligatory hook for episode 4. Durin, Disa and the king are back in Eregion, and Celebrimbor and Annatar are forging something. Could it be? Yes, it's the rings. Which means King Durin agreed to the proposal off-screen for unknown reasons. Why am I not surprised? We can't possibly have a scene of the king considering his options and weighing the pros and cons with his son, which would allow for us to see them regaining some kind of familial bond. It would allow us to understand more about Durin's caution regarding Annatar in particular. It would allow King Durin to articulate exactly why he has changed his mind. Damn it, Durin, we have 3 months of food supplies left. I will not let my people starve. But father, you were willing to let the elves die because their fate has been decided by the Valar. Perhaps when you are king, you will understand the responsibility I have to my own people. I don't give a damn about the elves and their tree. I am the king of Khazad-dûm, and I will not accept that we will fall until I have exhausted every last option, dear boy. Or something along those lines, you know? I typed that shit out in, 30 seconds? These showrunners were given $1 billion and they couldn't even put something like that together. Not only was there no conversation prior to this scene, but there is also no conversation between the king and either Celebrimbor or Annatar. He doesn't want to hear them explain this magical ring stuff to him so that he can decide for himself. He doesn't play hardball and go good cop, bad cop with his son. All of that happened off-screen. It's ring time, I guess. In one single episode, the rings of the dwarves are forged. Well, that was episode 3. Where do we begin when summarizing this? Let's start with an overview of the Isildur plot. The writers primarily needed to rescue Isildur and give him stuff to do, as well as reintroduce Arondir and Theo. And they also, of course, needed to write Bronwyn out of the story. The way they accomplish this is by repeatedly twisting reality to make sure that Isildur doesn't die, including, but not limited to, his horse tracking him down before he is eaten by the spiders, giving him a knife so that he can escape from the spiders, making him randomly bump into another character who has the exact information he needs, getting rescued by Arondir at the last second, and exploiting the fact that Theo is a dumbass to allow him to rescue his horse. The introduction of Arondir is fine, but it could have been justified far better. The method by which the writers delete Bronwyn from existence is laughable because it had no build-up whatsoever, and her death appears to have happened maybe a day prior to Isildur's arrival. The relationship between Arondir and Theo was very simple in Season 1, but it was not entirely without merit. Whereas in this episode, Arondir has become a robot who doesn't understand human emotion, and the writers repeatedly confuse feeling anger at failing to save a loved one, feeling guilt for having failed to save a loved one, and feeling guilt that you survived and they did not. And because the writers, of course, needed a cliffhanger, they make a load of, presumably orcs, attack the wild men and capture Theo to give Isildur something to do later in the season. This plotline is utter fucking garbage. Nothing seems to happen for any particular reason other than that the writers wanted it to, and the decision to team Isildur up with Theo is a remarkable one, given that these are two of the worst characters in the show. In Numenor, the writers needed Pharazôn to replace Miriel so as to set up the conflict that will presumably take place for the rest of Season 2 and beyond. The way they do this is by suggesting multiple times that the people are not happy with Miriel after the recent war that lasted for a couple of hours. This partly works, but partly doesn't, because Miriel does not understand how Galadriel was wrong, and how this false information directly affected her decision-making. The writers also used the cliffhanger involving Eärien and the Palantir to allow Pharazôn to usurp Miriel. The writers either inject false information into Eärien's brain via the Palantir, or Pharazôn tells her to lie. It is unclear which, but either way, she acts on this without appearing to have any second thoughts. The writers do have Afroc show up, seemingly to cause Eärien to doubt her conviction and question whether what she is doing is the right thing to do, but this leads nowhere. We don't get a later scene where Afroc questions her and tells her she can't trust men like Pharazôn, and while he's at it, he could also ask her what she is doing with a guy like Kemen who doesn't have any redeeming qualities whatsoever, which suggests that this was simply a setup for a future conflict between Afroc and Kemen. And finally, they make there be an eagle, and the eagle chooses who wins, which is not explained whatsoever, nor do I expect it to be in future. And the final thing the writers needed to accomplish in this episode is the forging of the Dwarven Rings of Power. This apparently necessitated the reconciliation of Durin with his father, even though this should not have been a necessity. And if it was indeed necessary for Durin to reconcile with his father in order to acquire the mithril needed to create the rings, then this should have maybe at least been mentioned in passing. The writers allowed Durin the opportunity to become suspicious of Anatar, but then failed to allow the king any opportunity to learn anything further about the rings or about Anatar. We can only infer that, well, the king decided to agree because they're running out of food, which, yeah, that's true. But this decision taking place off-screen robs the audience of any opportunity to learn anything about the characters involved. Additionally, the writers needed to come up with a way for all future rings to be crafted in secret, and so they have Anatar spin some insane story about how the High King doesn't want there to be any more rings, and that he wants to stop Celebrimbor from saving the world for some reason. All of this relies entirely upon Celebrimbor either being an idiot or being quite literally mind-controlled into obeying Anatar, because Anatar is quite obviously behaving very suspiciously, and Celebrimbor is not allowed to even question Anatar's legitimacy. Overall, as if it needs saying, this episode is piss. I don't know if it is quite as bad as episode 1, but it's on par. The Eregion plot and the Numenor plot are both accelerated dramatically to skip past what could have potentially been interesting character growth and development, because we gotta get those rings made, and we gotta get Pharazôn in charge. But meanwhile, the Isildur plot is lethargic as hell, and much like the Nori scenes in the first 2 episodes, very much seems to exist purely because Isildur is a character in the show, and therefore he's gotta do stuff. And to answer my opening question, I have absolutely no idea why Amazon decided to release the first 3 episodes simultaneously. Yes, you could say that Pharazôn usurping Miriel and the dwarves getting the rings is the jumping off point for the drama for the next 5 episodes, and so the writers maybe wanted the audiences to receive those 2 very important hooks so as to therefore get them interested so that they continue watching, unlike what happened with Season 1. But if this was indeed the thought process, then why did they waste so much time in the opening 3 episodes dicking about with subplots involving Nori and Isildur, amongst others? There is a huge amount of wasted time, and so much focus is given to things that are not important, or at least are not important yet. And as a result, most of the side plots in these opening episodes feel like episodic, formulaic busy work where the characters have to be given something to do because it's the episode of the TV show, rather than the writers actually having a story that they wanted to tell. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. I hope you have enjoyed the video. Please do chuck me a like and subscribe if you want to see part 4. Feel free to jump in the Discord and check out the second channel where I upload various things, including live streams and the music that I use in these videos. Links for both are in the description. But with that, I will see you in my next video.